Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to some of you who are watching from other continents, from other places. I'm Mikhail Rybalka, and I'm happy to see again all the visitors and all the people who would like to know more about the United States, about traveling there, about seeing many interesting landmarks. There are so many things that we can definitely highlight in this short presentation, but actually, I should say there are more things I might say about some specific features of life in the United States. And as a student, being a student, I really wanted to go to the United States. That was something that I had in my mind, and I wanted to see that for sure. This was almost an impossible dream, something that nobody would probably like. I knew had traveled there. So in this case, it was something that like some fantasy, something like going to the moon. Because, first of all, I remember many years of the Soviet Union. Then the early years of the new Russian state were rather difficult. Again, the country really had collapses and difficulties and economic hardships. And all of this meant something that would never become true. But again, I still believed in that. And of course, in this case, I really wanted to also to learn that you could get everywhere, especially in Irkutsk and some other locations. Not so many people could actually speak that, and there was no internet, no connection with any other like video outlets. Everything was rather expensive at this place. So, but I still had this dream that I would learn this language. In spite of many people's like words that I don't really have a musical ear. And that's right, I don't have a musical ear. So in this case, not so many people probably believed that it would be possible to imitate this language and again speak this language. Well, and I tried to do my best. Again, something that I was very much passionate about. Again, this obsession with language, culture, history eventually led me to the United States. So going a little bit further and trying to see what I really have here. So I just wanted to say that, okay, let me see whether, I don't know, like whether my slide's moving. Okay, it's moving. So the 50 states, there are so many places to see. And for us, especially for the people who haven't been to the United States, it looks like all the states are the same. They are very similar to each other. In reality, of course, there are still very big differences. Yeah, we have North and South, we have West, we have Northeast, and all of them are very peculiar. They have a lot of features. So this is something I discovered, of course, when I came to the United States. How did I come? And again, how possible it was simply to go there. It was this dream that I had in my mind to go to America to participate in educational programs. That's one of the programs that was offered to the students of former Soviet republics. Basically, you had to be a student, and then you needed to apply for different specific year-long programs, and it was difficult. I would say that it was almost impossible to win this because so many people really competed. And again, lots of people really could participate from big cities, from like very, very, I would say, different places, capitals, especially of the former Soviet republics. This is again the picture again in the group of the students who came to America with some American advisors, counselors, coordinators we had, and we came eventually to Middlebury College in Vermont. So that was again some new, I would say, totally new world opening up at I could see many new people, and again, could get to that culture that I dreamt about. I really had that wish that I really had this dream that I would need definitely to study again in the United States. For some reason, it was something that I wanted to pursue. And suddenly I got a chance to participate in the program and meet so many people. And that was one of the first things that I never had any experience, meeting people from other Soviet republics. So generally there were Russian students before, but now suddenly I'm in the midst of the students coming from all the Soviet republics. It's a certain, I would say these are specific features of foreign programs, especially educational programs. When you meet other representatives of other places, it's like USSR revisited in some ways, because for me it was always interesting to see how other people were doing, so what they were like thinking, what were their like certain concerns and other things. And so that gave me, of course, enough material also later to teach the class. I teach many classes at Irkutsk State University, but one of the classes is actually about the former Soviet republics, the Commonwealth of Independent States, post-Soviet space, and that's where I actually rely on many stories that I heard from, again, all these representatives of other countries. The whole Middlebury College was a fairy tale. That was something that, again, amazes, still I think amazes everybody who even comes there from other locations in the United States. Again, very beautiful green lawns, lots of things that, of course, were very different that time. And that's something that, of course, would probably I would say this is the place which is considered to be American Switzerland, yes, for us. But a little bit later, I traveled to other locations. I stayed and I studied in other places. And again, universities and campus lives, they really provide a lot of intellectual activities, something that would be a little bit harder to find without university, because university is a magnet. It's another feature, of course. It's a campus. Lots of things that really happen there. And this is, for example, the another university I went to a little bit later. Okay, several years later, actually, after Illinois Wesleyan, that was Texas Tech. And international framework, international students, this is where you suddenly realize that there are so many people from other countries. Many international students really come from China, India, and South Korea. So not really so many students really come for especially masters and graduate program, different activities, but and especially bachelor's level, that was again a unique opportunity at Illinois Wesleyan University. Studying there was another very, I would say, unique experience, having different classes, different teachers. But then I really wanted to use this opportunity. And again, the whole program really facilitated that. That was Freedom Support Act. That was actually one of the last years of this program that really originally set up by Reagan and Gorbachev during actually perestroika period of time. So at that time, I think everything was completely different. And in the 1990s, going to America, really finding lots of places there, that was like going to the moon again, like very different experience. So I thought of course, about other locations. I wanted not only to see Chicago, which was again like the city I lived not really far from, but I wanted to go to other locations. And I learned, and again at that time, I tried to read and learn many things about other places, other cities, to see basically lots of other locations. And during that first year, I traveled to 37 states. That really was something I would say rather marvelous and a little bit shocking for many other individuals, especially my American friends. Because, again, in American culture, for some reason, there is not really that very strong urge, like some incentive to go, like at least maybe like once a year or even like later. People can focus so much on work. Generally, what the people we see with you coming to our international facilities, like educational centers in Russia, these are the people who are generally students, and they are the ones who travel. They use different grants, scholarships, opportunities like that. This is a certain category, and of course, they are the ones who really sometimes want to learn about that culture. But generally, again, another category, these are the people who are relatively rich, also who want to travel, who want to see so many places. But again, thinking about most of the Americans, that was actually a big shock for me. One thing that I discovered in some special locations, that people don't really have vacations, okay? Not really so long vacations at all, like 1 week sometimes, after 5 years of work. This is, again, something, again, America really puzzles, I think, everybody. Not so much like really for maternity leave compared with European countries. These are some certain things that I highlight constantly in my lectures, that again, America is definitely, as we say, an outlier, different case, not really be compared with any other OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development countries. So here, for example, I learned about this opportunity to go to see many places using Amtrak. Not so many people believe that it was possible because one thing that is really shocking about the United States: no public transportation, no in many cases buses. Of course, they do exist. But again, the time schedules are rather, I would say, problematic. They go like several times a day. Then they don't really run like. It was also impossible to go anywhere using my car. I didn't know how to drive, especially when I was a student at that period of time. So Amtrak really offered this foreign pass that they still have. Foreign pass, we can get on board and really travel around locations within a certain area of the country. Generally, they were very, very inexpensive. Like you literally have 15 days where you go anywhere you want to, and it's about 150, like $200. That was again the pretty much affordable price, I think, for many international travels at that time. But mainly, many students also come in there, and also who wanted to see the United States. I think right now we have programs like Work and Travel, where many students really want to go to work in summer, but then a little bit to travel. And generally, they want, of course, to go to very famous destinations. So, to tell you about these very famous destinations and landmarks that many people want to see, of course, California and Florida, and actually all these big cities, they're always amazing and fascinating to see so many things. Universal Studios, for example, was one of these worlds that you find many, I would say, technological advancements, something that we I think still don't have in many other locations. So it's always constantly improving, updating them. And again, that Universal Studios, Disney parks, they're definitely, this is something that I should strongly emphasize, they are definitely worth like going. This is the place for discoveries of so many interesting things for the whole family, again, for any ages. There is no equivalent, I think, we have. This is maybe some idea for our oligarchs, or maybe for the Russian state, eventually maybe creating some specific like thematic villages, something like that. That would be like a good investment, perhaps. Okay, that would be like a good thing for us to see. Many of you can recognize this is actually the setting. Well, this is actually part of the park dedicated again to different like film studios, and if you can recognize, especially for fans of films, Back to the Future. Yeah, and finding again lots of other like different electronic exhibitions. Many people walk in there, and again in costumes. So it's actually a fascinating thing to see. One of their again something you see, of course, right now that I try to keep, and the legacy, I think, of the previous locations and places. For example, World Trade Center, we no longer can see. We cannot really see that, of course, at this point right now. But again, at that time, that was a very famous like landmark of New York. Going to many locations there, you would get again opportunities not only to go to these like main landmarks but also museums. Being a historian, I always try to go to the place that probably not so many people, I would say, usually go. Museums, for some reason, not really entertaining for. I would say maybe younger generations of Americans, so maybe something that we have now, a new tendency. But again, museums, they try to involve people, okay, more and more things. But for me, the first thing that I would go anywhere, it's a museum where you really like absorb a lot of things about this local culture. And then this is something that I focused and relied on in my lectures, my presentations, and my research. Another thing that, of course, this is the actually very interesting thing that also we need to maybe highlight a little bit more. Again, the view, of course, from World Trade Center. One thing that was something that I find there, it was not only magical that I found, and first of all, I came to many places and I traveled there and I managed, of course, to schedule everything without the help, of course, of internet, without any specific specific guidance, because at that time there were no smartphones. Everything was pretty much like prepared in like using different booklets, of course, finding like all these maps and programs. Usually all these Amtrak trains provided this very good access to the downtown area, and then that's where you could actually stay. And hostel was the place where you could get lots of people, international people coming from other locations who also wanted to travel. Again, one thing that mostly you would meet more people coming from other foreign destinations, New Zealand, Australia, Great Britain, who really wanted to see also like lots of locations. And then you get together with them in hostels and travel together safely in many locations for several days. So that was really much an idea for me to see all these different landmarks. But what is interesting about this picture that first of all, it was actually taken by the person I met on the World Trade Center top. His name was Borat. Like I remember a very famous film, but very very interestingly that I showed you like that photo in Middlebury when I came there for the orientation. We had another person whose name was, as I remember, Azamat. So, but if you watch Borat, actually Borat and Azamat really find and discover lots of locations, lots of places, really go through the adventures in America based on this film. So for some reason I met him even much earlier. So that's you could see much more than an average American. For some reason, American culture. In general, again, doesn't really focus so much on history. History, I mean, some people, of course, really fascinated with that, but again, they're rather rare. Most of Americans are very focused, of course, on work, and there are lots of things that they take care more. Yeah, cuisine, that's one thing. Then, of course, you have like sports, the American football. Yeah, it's almost a religion for many individuals. And again, very different interests. And of course, the easiest way was to meet, of course, lots of people who were in the educational sector, in the educational facilities, because again, there were so many things we could discuss. We could really really participate in many activities. Here, of course, I try to discover more and more of American cities, basically going there from one location to another. And finding maybe catching my own fish again. It's Universal Studios, but something again that is very much symbolic, that you find a new thing, and then you really also meet a lot of individuals, the people who sometimes are pretty known, of course, in American history. You meet them in person in some locations. There are lots of again thinking about historical locations. This is one thing that, again, that's a very unique city, New Orleans, in Louisiana, keeping a lot of traditional features of France, of French colonial cities. The city is very exotic. It's actually something like very specific, with, of course, lots of music, again, lots of cafes. But again, for me, that was like this French connection that was rather strange. Especially when you travel around New Orleans, there are still people who keep a little bit of that French language, so-called Cajuns. And again, Cajun culture and Cajun cuisine are very famous. Even now, we can buy in Russia something that I brought, I think, there are several things I brought actually the first time from Americas. I think not so many people really heard of even. First one to bring this. In the middle of the 90s, and again to show that that's the game that we have. And again, there was also this Tabasco sauce that we can find now in our supermarkets, but it comes again from Cajun cuisine. And there are many more things, of course, we find in many other locations. But again, thinking and about things you find in the United States. These are the things that you don't know, like normally find, of course, in Russia and Europe. Europe, again, it's more cultural, of course, historical occasions, and I personally have to admit that I haven't been to many continent. But thinking about the United States, well, lots of locations, lots of places, because I continued my count of states I even lost my count how many, but basically I traveled more and more, meeting many people. This is actually, and there were lots of individuals, I should say, who really were inspiring, very friendly, very open. You really find a lot of Americans who are eager also to share the world with you, to really see and meet and spend some time together. And again, lots of friends. I should say, like, about, like, basically many families that you also meet when you travel. Then a little bit later, I tried to organize travels again for my own family, living, of course, in America, especially in December. Since I was employed by the university, we generally had a vacation period of time. Universities are much better. So the best times, especially like for many university professors, university instructors, and also graduate students to travel was to go to some specific locations, some specific places. And generally, because snowfall really is a big problem in this period of time, December, January, it comes unexpectedly, and most of the American cities don't normally have this white Christmas. But then, of course, then it's a calamity when it comes, because it's not like in Siberia, no winter tires, yeah, where we need to switch to this. So it's people generally can be caught, yes, in this snowfall. So that's why going living for some period of time in Texas, I traveled to football destinations, like alternating them all the time. So that was California and Florida. Florida is something that you see here. It's one of these parks that we find in the area of Orlando. So let's say if some people ask me all the time this question, like, what is the best place to go to America? Well, it depends, of course, what you really want to find. If it's going to be more skyscrapers, United Nations, there are lots of other like famous museums, buildings, of course, in New York. New York might be the place, of course, in Chicago to see like big cities. But again, I think they're not really representative. I would say this is something that Russians don't normally know, but many American big cities, they are very even different from our urban centers. Thinking about Moscow and New York, there are so many differences that we find. Well, New York is pretty much like jungle of skyscrapers, and again, it's rather dark, of course, because again, buildings are very tall. There are so many different districts, border too, because these are the hubs where you can go, and it's cheaper to fly there. But if again, if there is an opportunity for some of you to go to America, I would say Orlando is really a very good place, good location, because there are several parks that you find. Yeah, it's not only Disneyland, which is located only in Los Angeles, but it's also Disney World, which has four parks instead of one, where you have all these different characters, where you have all these different thematic parks, and all of them really may. I think because again, going and taking my kids, of course, there. You would find that all the time they try to get something new, get something different, get something unbelievable. This is something that I show to my daughter. Again, the new world of nature. This again, something. This is something that I wanted to stress. Thinking about again traveling. Especially going like to some non-urban big city areas, of course, the best way now is to rent a car, which I think possible with the Russian driver's license, and that's a certain opportunity for you because again, something that we remember: public transportation does exist, of course, in bigger cities, but it's sometimes not really that reliable. Sometimes, again, taxis are very expensive. There are many things that this is something that also we need to remember. There are so many things we take for granted. We take for granted that we could always can walk to many places. But in reality, thinking about the United States, so many cities where you're, again, bigger cities, of course, you can walk, but again, some other like smaller locations, there is a road and then there is like a sign no trespassing, meaning that somebody's filled. So people are not supposed to walk, of course, along these like specific areas, and then the vehicle, a car is the only way. America is, I would say, is the best country literally to have a car, okay, because that's the best provision, very much affordable, and something that people also take like for granted. For me, it was a big difference, of course, when I came to see that pretty much almost like getting your mail is something that you need to have a car. You need to go to get this to, and then like, of course to buy groceries and other things. Now, of course, this is one thing that also I was thinking about the whole way that what we see in the United States, it's something that we might potentially get some features of this, I would say, urban life, suburban life, preferences, what we do, our behavior, we find in the United States. So in reality, if you want to see a little bit of the future, well, sometimes go to Moscow, yeah, because what we find in Moscow, a perfect European city with amazing infrastructure. Roads are just like the United States, something that, of course, when I came in the 1990s, there was a huge, big disparity. What I could see, of course, in Russia at that time, struggling economically, very low salaries, and then relatively affluent in the United States. No matter where you go, you really see all this like booming economy, construction, the economic rise, especially those Clinton years. So thinking about the whole piece that we find that this actually a very interesting new addition in one of these thematic parks in Orlando, where that is actually something that maybe I need to probably like to finalize my presentation today, but it's like a magical world that I really opened it up. And that's, I think, this is a very specific show. If you see, this is the Beauty and the Beast. But what you can get there, something that I still couldn't figure out how it all works, because that was something new. It was several years ago, and it was a brand new project, but it's also extremely difficult, I would say, in its sophistication, in technology, the way how you see a mirror, but then you can go through the mirror. Then you can see that this candle, it walks around you, it moves around you, it communicates with you. So that was something that also I found amazing, that how the country is also trying to change, how the country is trying to bring these new technologies in everyday's life. And I think maybe for the next presentations, I'm still like thinking about science, the way how we employ science, what we rely on science. This is something that probably we need to learn a little bit more from the United States, because science is something that is used extensively pretty much for almost anything that we do. Thinking about also like something that I wanted to say for today, that thinking about many cities that I travel to basically most of the places, except for Hawaii, of course, and Alaska. But the main interesting locations where I stayed much longer, where I made wonderful friends. They were like, first of all, it was Bloomington Normal, Illinois, Muncie, Indiana, and my last location was Lubbock, Texas. All these three cities are not really similar. Yeah, but again, thinking about the bigger city, one thing that is very different what we find with your compared, of course, with Russia, that downtown areas are not really that popular, or not really that like I would say popular, like something that you find people trying to live in. These are the areas where generally have some businesses, but in general, again, the downtown areas, these are some specific cultural buildings, but most of the people prefer to live in suburbs. And suburbs are the areas where you really find now in Russia, pretty much in many locations where the people who are more affluent, who are richer, they're trying to find locations outside of the city. One thing that again was a little bit also different in Indiana, something that I again bring up all the time. I heard, of course, all about these closures of plants, and people feeling some anxiety about that. Yeah, because so many jobs were lost, and again, factories more shipped to China or Mexico. So Bloomington Normal, of course, was the location with, of course, two great universities. Again, so many farmers also live there. That was another big puzzling thing, that when you see a person and that he says that I'm rich because I'm a farmer, that sounds still, I think, for many Russians, very I would say shocking for us. Yeah, it's something that we cannot really like even comprehend. And the same thing when you see, for example, a person and then he says, "Well, I can do so many things. I can buy this like very very expensive things because I'm a doctor." That's another thing that, of course, probably will change to this direction at some point, but maybe not at this point. And of course, living in cowboy land, yes, in West Texas, again, was another amazing experience where you have again a big number of people who come there. There's a very different like spirit of first of all adventure among many people who live even there. Again, it's like this previous layer territories of West. And again, talking about all these places that it's hospitality, it's friendship, it's again these certain qualities that sometimes I'm thinking, well, that probably unite again all these places I've seen, but I'm sure this is again the bigger picture of the United States. It's not that country that we normally have in our like shown. Of course, there are still like any like many problems with that, but I think the country is very very different from what we generally perceive. But again, that's another thing story that potentially we might expand a little bit more. The images of the country, the ways how we see it, perceptions and distortions. To be continued in future. I think in this case, I will stop to see whether we have, I will stop my presentation, whether we have any questions coming from the audience. Okay, so I'll need to stop my presentation. Get into this very very good level of like deep learning of language, but it's extremely important. Yeah, it's a necessary thing. A little bit later I traveled to New Zealand. That was very different way like of English language spoken there, and still try to for me it's a fascination, something new, different. So excited, yes, about that. Maybe it's something to find again the pleasure of doing this. Okay, the next question is, what did you like most? Okay, while traveling around the United States. First of all, yeah, what I try to, I like the trains. Then trains are considered to be elite, like vehicles for rather rich people, generally in the United States. Normally, Americans don't use trains, and for me, that was just sometimes like I think I shocked many people telling that, well, I travel using Amtrak trains, and number two, that I stayed in hostels. Again, something that many people were familiar with. Now, remember the word hostel we didn't even have in the 1990s. Now, something that we have. We constantly use that word, of course, pretty much like now in our everyday life. But again, talking about hostels, it's a completely different like culture because so many people will travel. There are like some excursions organized there. People usually are very nice and friendly to each other because these are like fellow travelers. As we say, there is a Russian word like Sputnik, yeah, fellow traveler going with you, like also like to this excursion, meeting for some period of time. Thinking about the United States in general, I think that might be also a very cool thing. Okay, Orlando, Florida definitely has a very, very strong potential, especially traveling there in December right now. When I would come like from Texas, I traveled there several times, and Miami would be the place to swim now. Can you imagine December? It's because of Gulf Stream. You can literally feel that warmth of water swimming, plunging into the waters. And thinking also about other locations, again, all states are pretty like fascinating. There are some similarities, like the ways how like roads, infrastructure. Again, America really puzzles and I think amazes everybody, like so many travelers, by its very good network of roads with viaducts, with actually very big sophistication, the way how many roads are created. And that's again a very how many roads are created. And that's again a very interesting, like a big contribution that, but also big design, what we see there. Then there are lots of like locations in the mountains. Later, a little bit later, especially with my kids, I started traveling to national parks. That is, I think, one of the best things you find in the United States. We have national parks, but I think we don't normally have like very good roads. Something in Lake Baikal we start now copying, but in many cases we still have a lot of things to learn how the way how we organize infrastructure and many other things. National parks and state parks were something unbelievable, where you can walk for the whole day. Everything is well provided. Like you have always this, and basically you can do it by yourself. I think one of the most beautiful areas were, first of all, California parks, and talking about Sequoia parks, because again, they were just something totally different, the way how you like what you normally don't find, of course, anywhere else. Very exotic. Another very interesting place and location was actually one of the most beautiful part of America. That was Fort Ross, where I still have my very good friend Hank Baum from who lived here for some period of time in Irkutsk. He still lives and interprets, translates, and organizes many activities and things in that park. And that is Fort Ross, located very close to San Francisco. By the way, this Fort Ross Park is not known pretty much for again to most of the United States visitors. And so that's also the location that you really like find. Okay, so Russia-like state or city that you visited, I think that was Fort Ross because it really it has Russian culture, Russian exhibition. It's just like this fort, this stroke as we find, the most interesting thing that about Alaska and even continuation going to Fort Ross, that was this connection with Irkutsk because Irkutsk was actually the capital for some period of time, or not only of East Siberia but also Kamchatka, Chukotka, and Alaska. And so it was Irkutsk really governing these areas, and that's why we still have a lot of things connected with a Russian American company in the city and some activities here. So thinking about the most interesting, like Russian, again, I think Chicago, for example, it has many ethnic backgrounds, but there are some areas, of course, which might be a little bit similar. Remember, Americans don't normally live in high rises like we usually like live with here. That's something for the United States. Population is not really that popular. Well, people in the urban areas, they sometimes have to live there, but most of the people would prefer separate houses. There are several like options, of course, like that. Mostly, of course, in suburbs where you have majority population working. I think that's a trend that I think our society is also transforming at this point. We still have it's more for the rich, but later it will be more available for the middle class. I haven't been to Alaska because I think in talking about nature, there are so many things that you find there very similar. Even when I traveled to Washington or Oregon, these states were still, you definitely feel that it's a little bit warmer than here in Siberia. But again, talking about the northern areas of the United States, they're similar. Yeah, some, especially like in the mountains, you find similar climate again in the forests, and something that Russians also take for granted that it should be everywhere. But for a long period of time in Indiana, in Illinois, in Texas, I lived in prairies and even like some semi-deserts, which might be a little bit unusual for most of us, yeah, to be around. And again, do you have many foreign friends? Oh, definitely. I still keep in touch with wonderful people, like in Indiana, Rob Crank. Yes, and there are lots of friends. Of course, I have in Illinois and in other locations in Texas, Lubbock. Of course, I really probably didn't have time to focus on some of the friends that. Some of them became very, very, I would say, and also known figures. Many of them succeeded in doing many, many like things academically. So again, I'm more, of course, in the academic world. That's the world that I really like, and I really find that, of course, the United States has a very, very that's a very big strength that we don't really recognize. The fundamental science, the way how universities really run, something that we're trying to do, of course, and mainly, of course, it produces some good results in St. Petersburg and Moscow and some bigger other cities, but there is still a lot of things to do. Talking about the way how the whole science is. But again, just sometimes, like when I talk with my students, I say, well, that's again the person that I saw. I am Supreme Court justices, like many of them came to us. Nina Khrushcheva came to us to my university, and basically we tried to accommodate her. Like, and there were so many other like famous people who would get, of course, to American campuses from Moscow, but also from American background. Yeah, so thinking about communication, of course, definitely communication is a big thing now. With thinking about especially older generations, people born in the 1920s and 1930s, these are the people who told me many, many wonderful stories, of course, of their life. And I think that generation is very different from like boomers and, of course, from the contemporary, like recent generations. Again, they had to go through war, difficulties. People understood that. Again, and one thing that I think America in general can puzzle is like shock you, it's like the culture of like wasting a lot of like food resources. Generally, American cars are bigger. Okay, so environmental standards are very, very different in the United States compared with Japan and European countries. So thinking about houses, it's also like a lot, big space, a lot of space, like literally, like for us, something difficult to understand. Russia is a huge country. This is actually one puzzling thing. But when you really go inside of any American friend's house or apartment, you really see how much space, how many rooms they have, and that is again something again in America people take for granted. But in reality, if you're gonna go to Europe, you'll see how little space is there and generally in the bigger cities, yes, in Moscow and many other places, space is something for the rich or generally for the people who can pay for this. So that's something that we also need to constantly think about the whole world. Again, something that we need to understand. Lots of things that we take for granted. And when I came there, I really saw that lots of things took for granted. They don't exist at all. The whole country really moved and changed them, and that happened to many things that we had in the 1990s and even before. Commuter trains. Talking about these trains going, for example, between many cities. Now we pretty much lost them. They're not really needed because so many people really have cars. We have suburbs. Yes, it has come to us. Not really Amazon, like we're creating this very good postal delivery service, but again something that we're trying to use with several other like things. But it's also the way how we what we see is changing. Campuses, we still cannot understand it because we normally don't have universities and campuses just like in the United States, but at least trying to accommodate and trying to see what they're doing. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe there'll be like several more years, and then some places, some locations will be similar. When you're going to go again to Moscow with you, lots of things would be very, very even much better than, for example, New York. Like thinking about like lots of achievements of the Soviet past, thinking about our educational records, but also about subways, culture, historical things. Very often, that's probably the thing that you don't really find in many like American cities. So because again, it's generally the urban center. People sometimes don't even go to. Suburbs live more in peace and harmony, but sometimes it's very, very different from Russian way of life. People do go, of course, to theaters, but again in bigger cities or in campuses. Thinking about intellectual or cultural life, it's still a little bit different, of course, what you find there. Thinking about many things that we like to travel, that's something that I said. That's what's actually that was something that I discovered that myself, that anytime I would go anywhere, and I tell later to my Americans, I usually had my fellow travelers going with me anywhere. They were people from Europe because they have this traveler spirit. So Russian culture in general, we still have, remember, this is something that we think, well, everybody has a vacation. In reality, in America, it's zero. It's up to the employer. So there is no pressure, but the employer might give it to you 1 week, maybe, in 5 years after working hard. Well, that we have, yeah, talking about especially electric bills. Yeah, these are the things that many people don't really realize. Yes, salaries are high, more to that. Something that we don't normally like. And when I was a student, I didn't understand that because it was all provided. But in reality, there were lots of things that were very I would say like expensive in the United States. Electric bills might run 300, 400, $500. Yes, thinking about all per month. Thinking about water, expensive. Here in Irkutsk, we literally pay like $2, $3 for electricity per month. Yeah, because it's the cheapest electricity in the world. We think it's like everywhere else, but even in Russia, it's different. Thinking about clean water, we take it for granted, for example, here in Irkutsk, because, well, we think it's almost everywhere. But in reality, I'm saying, well, even in Moscow, water is different. Water is very expensive, like literally for American households, for American like apartments, it's like 200, 300, even probably more. It depends again. Like thinking about New York, we definitely how we like find a lot of things which are again all the time very different from our way of life, and that's why we need to travel. Many Russians now used to travel to Thailand or to Vietnam, where it has become almost like Irkutsk Dutch. Like for Siberians, generally, like going there, it was something that we thought it was affordable, possible for us, and again, very world. And the same thing with the United States. And again, with one more thing I want to say, it's like a lot of things we still learn again from, like especially scientific achievements, technological achievements. It's something again that America really still like dominates and has a lot of like very high potential. But we still need to understand a little bit more of this country. I think there's like still so to deal with. I have a question from Eric, and Eric saying. Again, about impression Americans relate to Native American history and culture. Um, I met many Native American representatives, Eric, in Texas. Okay, there were like lots of different, I would say, events, cultural events. For those who we in the Soviet Union had this like all this stereotype, but in some ways that was this critical image of the United States mistreating Native Americans, something that Soviet propaganda was all emphasizing constantly in the media. I think personally, this is something that I discussed with, like many things with representatives, Native Americans. I traveled to some areas in New Mexico and especially in Arizona. The government is trying to do a lot of things. So I think the situation is changing. Native American communities, they literally live, of course, in the Badlands. They are in the areas where you don't really have normal agriculture. Historically, many of these areas, I would say, economically non-developed, or there is no really any certain good economy there. What the government has tried to provide, it's a lot of like investments into like an opportunities for people to work, especially because and also, like there was, I think, a lot of big support for the Native American histories, like some specific studies. That's something that I noticed, and it's a big trend in the United States. Yeah, like Eric, when we take with you like many textbooks, it's always materials about Native Americans. Again, the topic is something that I think right now in Russia we don't really have any. Like I try to follow any publications about the United States, what is published. In everything is the same. I'm saying, well, the government is doing a lot. Any government, it doesn't matter what political party we have. So the United States is trying to raise some of the like grievances and some problems, of course, of the past. because historically, of course, the Native Americans didn't get the right, I think, to vote until 1920. So in reality, they were not really given citizenship rights. And the same situation we had in Australia. That's something that we don't normally don't even know. Only in the 1960s, yes, did we have the Australians provide the citizenship rights to Aboriginals. Well, that's again a very, very interesting question, Eric. Thank you for listening to us because we have again that's only a small part of what I really try to highlight today, because I think if the specific things that you would like to maybe ask or recommend, like what to do or what to focus, yes, like in the future, because I try to watch American Center, what it really provides, again, some very good presentations of the United States personnel living, of course, in Moscow, some specialists, very, very interesting programs, pretty much like almost anything. But here I decided, well, I can contribute maybe to this like story of the United States that, again, many friends of mine actually managed to get, at least for some period of time, to go to America. America is hard to get a visa to. But in general, again, it's still a very, like I would say, good destination for so many people who want to see another world. It's like going to the, I think for us it's like going to the 22nd century. It's also Singapore. Yeah, we have like some locations, of course, in Europe. I think Europe is much closer to the Russian type of the city that we find. And Russia is, of course, trying to westernize no matter what. Yeah, we're trying to get closer to the many like Western models. But I think America still keeps a lot of things that makes it unique. That all the make again the country very different from the rest of the society. It's so it's huge. It's a big world. It's also like a lot of different cultures still come and shape that society. So it's constantly never-ending story. Yeah, that the country really has. Personally, think well, it has, of course, a very big major role to play. Of course, in many big events. Talking about not only politics, but thinking about like lots of things connected, of course, with science, especially technology, the way we are driving, with the way we're going to. Something I told, of course, many students, look, like what are the biggest companies, of course, in the world? These are the companies that we find like based on intellectual property, and that's where the United States is really a leader. So that's something that I think our technologies and our science and our in this case educational facilities need to understand that it's not only industrial might. Yes, that's something that we like think is the only way how we can measure development, but it's also post-industrial values and things that we already can see in the United States, something that we need to pretty much like in some ways replicate, no matter whether we want it or not. All right. Well, I think it's almost our time. Again, thank you, Alena, thank you, Eric, thank you, Tatiana, for your questions, because I think I tried to highlight several things that we normally don't find in my lectures. I always try to do something that, again, that's my like contribution to our better understanding of things that we have. Okay, in the news, we have like more analysis of the situation and some again experience that I shared today. They were also like I think provided you with some opportunities to look at this corner, this country, from a different angle. All right. Well, thank you so much. In this case, yes, it's 10 o'clock for us in Irkutsk. It's no more earthquake. Yeah, Eric, we had an earthquake here, but hopefully no more earthquakes here. So it should be a quiet night this time. All right. Thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody.